Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here and I'm back with another update on what's been going down in EVE Online. The news of the past couple of weeks has been dominated by the outbreak of war between the Imperium and the as of yet unnamed bloc of Legacy and PandaFam, which has caused conflict all around the southwest of the map as the earliest moves of the campaign begin to play out, with PandaFam attacking Cloud Ring and Fountain from the north, Legacy attacking Quirius and Period Basis from the east, whilst the Imperium launches counterattacks of their own towards Catch and Iridia. But the direct centre of the action isn't the only place that World War B2, as it's being called, is impacting EVE's politics. The preparations for and creation of a new power block that's predominantly blue to one another has accelerated some of the other conflicts that we've covered in previous episodes. For example, in Fade and Pureblind, the existing tension between one-time coalition mates, French Connection and the United Federation of Conifers boiled over into an active Sov war that led to FXR being pushed out of the northwest. Meanwhile in Providence, the war between Proviblock and Rekking Crew has taken on a distinctly different strategic outlook, as Rekking Crew has joined the Legacy and PandaFam bloc for the duration of World War B2. Given that in the past Legacy had supported Proviblock, this leaves them with effectively no allies to call upon as Rekking Crew continues to expand their holdings in the region, taking multiple new systems. And finally, alongside all of this we have the one constant. Fighting in the Vale of the Silent has continued, with a number of clashes between all sides taking place about as far away from the war in the southwest as you could possibly get. The only real changes here have been a consolidation in the alliances involved, with the Federated Alliance of Mafias merging into Freight Train Diplomacy, and Triumvirate, a member of PandaFam, disbanding. Alright, so let's start with the main event and dig into the conflict that's erupted in the south. Now, as I've explored before, the non-invasion pact between Legacy and the Imperium was set to officially expire on July the 4th, but even as it still supposedly stood in effect, the tensions between the two coalitions quickly began to rise, with roams from both sides suspiciously coinciding with the other's ADM fleets, making it harder to prepare for a potential Sov defense, and cloaky camping, something that the Imperium had expressly pushed to be restricted in the initial wording of the NIP, starting to become more prevalent by both sides. The incident that I feel best defines this pre-war period though was a little more convoluted, taking place in the system of EX6 TAC in Catch, where the Imperium was in the process of unanchoring a Fortizar in order to not leave structures in indefensible positions, something that we've seen them do in Cloud Ring and Pureblind previously. Traditionally, this is done by setting a rock wall near it and then jumping out of system after scooping it, something that can be done in just a few minutes with relatively minimal risk. However, simple farmers, a small group of players who live in Catch and perform asymmetrical warfare against Legacy in the region, spotted this and decided to pounce, dropping a handful of dreads onto their rock wall as it sat there waiting for the final few minutes of the timer to tick down. A Legacy Caracal fleet then arrived and began to shoot at the Imperium's defensive Jackdaw fleet and the tackled rock wall, forcing the Imperium to turn their fire onto that fleet rather than dealing with the simple farmers' dreadnoughts. As a result of this, the Rorqual died with the Fortizar still inside its cargo, and whilst the Imperium was able to eventually hold the field, killing 3 dreads and a number of Caracals, they would end up on the wrong side of the ISK war in the skirmish, killing 10 billion and losing 20. In addition to this, whilst this whole thing was playing out, another Fortizar, this time a faction one, was unanchoring in Fortac O, the border system between Quirius and Catch. The distraction allowed someone else to sneak a Rorqual into position and scoop it for themselves, before the Imperium could. Now, as one might expect, both sides have presented to me rather different assessments of what this whole thing means, with the Imperium diplomat that I spoke to highlighting this as an example of Legacy going against both the spirit and the wording of the NIP, and the Legacy diplomat claiming that the Imperium was just looking for anything that they could do to make themselves seem like an aggrieved party. So I'll leave it up to you to decide who was in the right here, but what I really think this goes to show is just how much tension had built up between these two coalitions and was ready to be released. So, on July the 4th, it wasn't just members of the Imperium who were listening to the State of the Goonian address delivered by the Mittani. Alongside them were curious spectators and, of course, the Imperium's soon-to-be opponents, PandaFam and Legacy, both of whom had formed fleets with the expectation of the Imperium using the occasion to launch a preemptive strike. Now, I'll link the full speech in the description below for those of you who want to listen to it, but I think that this section in particular helps set out the Imperium's point of view as the war began.
We will no longer be putting energy into a rivalry with NCDOT or PanFam. Our revenge has been satisfied, and that chapter in the Book of Grudges is at last, 14 years since the start of the Great War, now forever closed. Mind you, we expect NCDOT to attack us in this war. We expect all of PanFam, Horde, Fraternity, all of them to attack us. But we are moving on emotionally to our new favorite enemy. I think it's best for Goonswarm. I think it's best for NCDOT, and I think it's best for EVE as a whole. So now we will open a new chapter in our Book of Grudges, a new chapter in the history of the great empires of EVE Online, because Test is next.
As that very speech was being broadcast across the internet though, Legacy and PandaFam made moves of their own, sending their assembled fleets into 49 TAC U to attack an Imperium Ansiblex and break the nip early, whilst a myriad of structures were also anchored in catch, including a keepstar that was hastily named 1111, and led to quite possibly the most boring narrative fight that I've ever seen on Reddit, as people debated the tactical and strategic implications of exactly where it was placed, how it was aligned, and of course, how it was named. After the State of the Goonian address concluded, the Imperium formed up in kind, with almost 2,000 people joining various fleets and proceeding to rush towards Legacy and PandaFam. However, as the Ansiblex that the group had been attacking was already reinforced, the fleets in the Imperium's crosshairs retreated, and whilst a number of stragglers were caught and killed by the Imperium, no real fight broke out. The Imperium was then able to use this lack of resistance to launch a counterattack, reinforcing a number of Legacy jump bridges and entoasing the majority of Paragon's Sol. Ultimately, the first objectives of the war would amount to little, with Pan Legacy failing to destroy the reinforced Ansiblex, and the Imperium failing to capitalise on the offensive timers set. But the war itself was most certainly on, and smaller skirmishes would break out between the two sides pretty much continuously after this, with the next 48 hours leading to over 100 billion ISK and 1,500 ships being destroyed, just in the regions of Esoteria, Paragon Sol, Quirius, and Catch. July the 5th saw Legacy's answer to the State of the Goonian with their own address, with Pro-God Legend laying out the opposing coalition's perspective on the war.
And so here we are. Currently there are well over 400 Titans converging from all over EVE, and that will combine with our Titan fleets from Legacy and Fire and all of our allies, and it will be the largest Titan force ever assembled in EVE Online. Most of EVE is unified around one goal, that this time Goons must finally be destroyed. This will not be an easy task. As you know, Goons have truly built a fortress, and the threat of annihilation has finally spurred them to actually wake up and do something, which has increased their numbers pretty significantly, as you've seen. But we are all committing to getting this done. All of the alliances joining forces today have agreed that we will not make the same mistake we made at the end of World War B. We will see this through to the end. And months from now, when this war is won, we will finally be looking at an EVE that is worth playing.
As before, a link to the full speech is in the description if you want to hear everything in context. But that speech wasn't the only event of the day, as the Keepstar that had been anchored on the 4th online successfully, and Legacy began to move out of their temporary staging system of 7R5 in Stain to FAT TAC 6. Following that, even more structures were anchored, with a second Keepstar and a Soichio being added. In the days that followed, the original Keepstar would then be transferred to PandaFam, and a steady stream of supercapitals, predominantly Titans, from both coalitions would be moved into the system, as you heard from the speech. And this is a really important detail, as it means that PandaFam and Legacy are coordinating their supercapital fleets and specifically preparing for a BTAC R5 or UALX style fight, where Titans in particular have outsized importance due to the power of their coordinated DD volleys. It could also signal that they believe this southern theatre to hold more importance than the south, but that's a bit more speculative. This also means that we finally have all of the coalitions involved in this war set up in what appears to be their main staging systems for the coming campaign. Legacy is, as mentioned, projecting their power from FAT TAC 6 in Catch towards the regions of Quirius and Period Basis. Pandafam is deployed to the system of Hophib in Iridia and is attacking Fountain and Cloud Ring. The majority of the Imperium is located in 1DQ in Delve and performing both defensive actions and counterattacks, mostly focusing on infrastructure, but with the initiative stationed separately in the system of IGE in Fountain in order to help hold that region specifically. Now it took a few days, but the first system to fall in the war was 4TAC-O, a system in Catch that had been held by Goonswarm since the signing of the initial NIP and the end of the Winter War in 2017. But really the loss of this system was a foregone conclusion, given that it was only 5 jumps from Legacy staging, well within the range of all forms of capitals, and fairly low ADM on top of that. The first truly defensible system that was successfully attacked came a little later, in XC TAC, which marks the border between Period Basis and Stain. Here, the two sides brought their main fleets to either side of the regional gate, and engaged in a stare-down, as both sides' Entosis teams ran around the constellation trying to secure the objective, with Pan Legacy seemingly having the advantage there, as the defenders' control was slowly eaten away at. It was only with 3 to 4 more nodes to go that the attackers finally jumped in, and a real fight started, seeing an Imperium Dread and Fax supported Boltec fleet go up against a Macario fleet and Munin fleet. Now, despite being heavily outnumbered, with the Imperium fielding only 453 pilots against 1,188, the defenders were able to win the ISK war here and force the opposing fleets off the field, killing 22 billion and losing only 6. However, the strategic objective, control of the XC-TAC iHub, fell to the attackers, with Test installing an iHub of their own afterwards. The northernmost frontiers of Imperium territory have also seen some success from the attackers, with Pandafam being able to clear out the majority of iHubs belonging to the initiative in Cloud Ring, although I haven't been able to find any battle reports that would help me judge the level of resistance being felt there. Other than that though, the Imperium has been able to keep up a solid defense in the first couple of weeks of the war, protecting other regional border systems like TCAG TAC 3, D4KU TAC 5, and 49 TAC U that have been repeatedly attacked by Pan Legacy, not to mention counterattacking XC TAC and other Pan Legacy gains in order to force their opponents to defend their new holdings. Right now though, the conflict seems to be relatively subdued, as both sides are launching predominantly sub-capital based attacks, targeting flex structures like antiplexes and Sino beacons to temporarily inhibit movement, and creating massive amounts of SOV timers in order to try and hit a lucky roll that would allow one side to have a significant time zone advantage over the other, a response to both sides setting their core hours to where they perceive their opponents to have the least players available in a tactic that's known as time zone tanking. Despite the relatively low intensity of the fighting that's been seen, the fact that it's happening around the clock as opposed to being tied to one particular time zone means that the losses are adding up quickly, with 2.5 trillion ISK having been destroyed by the 16th of July. That's the equivalent to around $15,500 US, going by the black market rate for selling ISK. Moving forwards, what I'm most interested to see in this conflict is just how Pan Legacy intends to breach into the DPBQ sphere that makes up the Imperium's core territory with a capital umbrella, something that's going to almost certainly be necessary to bring the war to a conclusion, as no matter how much you outnumber an opponent by, if they're able to bring force multipliers like Faxes, Supercarriers and Horde Dreads onto the field, and you aren't, it's going to be a bad time. The reason why piercing this will be so difficult is because of how EVE's geography is set up, with the regions of Delve, Quirius and Period Basis being notably dislocated from the surrounding regions, and thus out of direct jump range from them. This means that in order to bring your capitals and supercapitals into this sphere, you're going to need to jump them through a regional gate, which is exceptionally dangerous due to the fact that doing this massively spreads out the fleet, leaving it susceptible to both waterboarding or dread bombing. In fact, it's entirely possible to jump a Titan and a Fax through a regional gate together and have the Fax decloak entirely out of rep range of the accompanying Titan. As a result, the border system of 49 TAC U has been heavily targeted by the attackers, as it represents the best possible foothold that they could establish in this area. And I predict that we'll see at least one major capital clash take place in it before this war is over, as the Imperium attempts to maintain their proverbial high ground when it comes to geography. Now, if you want to read a bit more detail on some of the constituent fights over the first week or so of the war, I highly recommend you check out January Valentine's work on somethingyoushouldknow.substack.com, where she's collated an absolute ton of battle reports, kill mails, and interesting tidbits that'll help you round out the story. Okay, turning back the clock a little, we saw some other signs of political consolidation in the lead up to this war breaking out, most notably in the near north, where tensions between the Pan-Fam-leaning United Federation of Conifers and the Imperium-leaning French Connection have been rising for some time. Previously, the two had been part of the same coalition, but the fighting in their core territory of Purblind led to differences quickly emerging as they found themselves on the opposite sides of fights over Imperium and Pan-Fam objectives. This was only added to when French Connection recruited a corporation from their previous enemies, Dracarys Dot, which Darius, the leader of UFC, accused of being a bot farm. FXR, when asked, rebuked this claim, but it remains a part of the motivation for UFC's later actions. An official reset to neutral standings between the two and the dissolution of the coalition was originally planned for June the 14th, but this was moved to a day earlier as a result of an incident around looting containers dropped from an abandoned Fortizar. Shortly after this, as highlighted in a previous episode, UFC then participated in the fight for a final timer of a still-standing FXR Fortizar, ending up on its kill mail. Around a week after this, skirmishing between the two took on a more serious note, with FXR reinforcing a constellation of UFC space, and UFC then responding in kind and entossing the majority of FXR's systems. Now, as always, it's hard to try and pull up a battle report that really exemplifies what was going on at a ground level in modern Sov warfare, as it tends to revolve more around mobility and hit-and-run tactics rather than a straight-up fleet versus fleet fight, so you end up with action being spread across multiple systems and multiple hours, as both sides try and kill each other's intossing ships without getting caught by hostile defensive fleets. But if we take a wider view of the conflict, and look at all of the losses taken by both sides where a member of the opposing faction was on the kill mail, the results look like this, with the UFC killing 52 billion, although a lot of that does come from structures, and losing 10 billion. Control of the strategic objectives also went in the UFC's favour, with them successfully pushing FXR off of the Sov map by the 6th of July, and bringing a pretty insane total of 101 systems under their control, making them the 7th largest alliance by Sov footprint in the game, despite their relatively small size. This makes me wonder if anyone will challenge the UFC in the near future for this newly acquired territory, and of course, just how well they'll be able to utilise it economically. Needless to say, I'll be keeping an eye on the region, and I'll update you if anyone who hasn't been sucked into the vortex of World War B2 starts sniffing around the edges. And whilst FXR does retain some presence in Purblind, as it's impossible to kick them out of the NPC space that the region is centred around, it looks as though the majority of their operations have shifted towards the region of Fountain, where they're fighting Pan-Fam alongside the Imperium. So whilst they have lost a small amount of members, it looks as though this eviction isn't going to kill the Alliance, and we'll see them around some other time. Who knows, perhaps if the Imperium wins World War B2, they'll be able to move back for some revenge. Purblind isn't the only region that's seen drastic changes to the balance of power and the ownership of Sov in the past couple of weeks though, with Providence also being in turmoil over the last week of June and entering into mid-July. As mentioned in the introduction, a large part of this comes down to the fact that Providence's previous allies in their long-standing conflict with Rekking Crew, Legacy, have decided to blue Rekking Crew. This means that Rekking Crew effectively no longer has a bigger fish to worry about when it comes to deploying their capitals and super capitals in the region, further exacerbating the differences between the two coalitions on that level, as Proviblock has historically always been gun-shy about deploying capitals and super capitals of their own in response to hostiles. Now, in my previous news video, I mentioned that Rekking Crew had sent an offer of a non-invasion pact to Proviblock in order to formalise a pause in the conflict, but for full disclosure, Equinox Daedalus, the leader of the coalition, reached out to me to deny this. Following that, I had a conversation with Rocket X, the leader of Rekking Crew, who told me that he had in fact reached out to Providiplos and provided some logs in an attempt to verify that claim. And this is the kind of situation that I run into an awful lot when trying to report on EVE politics, as both sides disagree on the facts of what happened. So again, I'll leave it up to you to decide who you want to believe here. Regardless, what happened in the next few weeks leaves little room for argument, as Rekking Crew took both the R3 TAC and GTAC-5 iHubs, leaving them in control of all of the borders that Providence has with LOSEC. In addition, Rekking Crew was able to successfully anchor a Keepstar in YTAC MP with no contest from Proviblock, giving them a new staging point from which to project supercapital power across the region with much more reliability than their previous staging Fortizars. Adding insult to injury, on the 15th of July, long-standing Proviblock alliance Care Factor was disbanded. This was apparently done by a disgruntled member of the alliance who, after his corporation left to join a Rekking Crew alliance, pretended to be seeking to rejoin and continue to be part of their organisation. A day after being given a director character in the executive corporation of the alliance, they dropped all SOV that it held and kicked out all of the corporations. There have been some accusations that this player was a spy rather than someone who was upset, but as they haven't come forwards publicly to confirm either way, it's impossible to tell. In the chaos following this event, Rekking Crew was able to take the majority of the systems up for grabs, securing 7 of them, whilst Proviblock was only able to retake 1. Finally, moving on to the Veil of the Silent, we've seen a number of small changes to the players involved in the region. First of all, we saw the Federated Alliance of Mafias merge into Freight Train Diplomacy, or BOOM. From the discussion that I've had with members of the Alliance, it looks as though this was mostly drama-free, and represents a consolidation of them into one group for a better ease of operation, given that they've worked in tandem since their entry into the region earlier this year. And also means that they're not handicapped when trying to aid each other in SOV warfare, as only the Alliance whose SOV is attacked can defensively in Tosis. In addition to this, we saw Triumvirate, who had only just moved into the region a few weeks ago, disband. According to Gas Tyrell, the former leader of the Alliance, this was an amicable breakup that was caused by the divergent gameplay interests of its constituent corporations. His own corporation, No Mercy, has since gone on to primarily engage in small to mid-gang warfare across the map, whilst other corporations have either filtered back into PandaFam alliances or gone on to forge their own independent path. As all of this went down, there was of course the usual fighting between the various factions involved in the region, as Volta remains deployed to the area, Trigger Happy, Toilet Paper, Rote Capel and the Unspoken Alliance continue to push in from their home region of Tribute, whilst Forsaken Empire, Deepwater Horizons, Quiet Alliance and PandaFam continue to battle it out for control of the region proper. Quite frankly though, I'm sick of getting shit on by the locals for not covering every single fight that they deem important, and admittedly making mistakes with my own reporting. So instead, I'm going to leave a link to a battle report written by Dade Alice in the description below, and if you want to see more reporting like that, please feel free to ping him on Reddit for it. I'm sure he'll appreciate the attention. And, all spite aside, it is genuinely a great summary of what's been going on in the region, written by someone with first-hand experience of the actual fighting that's taking place there. Alright, now before we get to the outro, I do owe you guys a bit of an explanation. This video only covers until around the middle of July, because, as you might be able to tell, this one is pretty late, and I didn't want to sacrifice on the depth of my coverage just to get things out quicker to you. So over the course of the next week, what I'm hoping to do is get a catch-up video which will cover the second half of July, and then from then on I can continue going back into that kind of 2-week speed that I'd been keeping up for a while, and fell behind on a little bit here. The extra good news is that I am learning from my mistakes, and I'm going to be trying to bring more people into the process of actually making these videos so that I can bring them to you with a bit more regularity and hopefully with even more details and polish. So if you want to help by recording more backing footage or providing me with more research, then please get in touch and I'll try and figure things out as we go forwards. Now, as always, a special thanks goes out to our Crassuses. Brood from Northern Coalition, Zolka Lando, Jessica, January Valentine, Armor Truck, and Band Siren, plus 2 other donors who wish to remain anonymous, as well as to our other $5 and above patrons in Big Bada Boom, Czar, Dunk Dinkle, Miss Moses, Kem, the Ashfell Celestial Academy, Closer Canty, Crazy Daisy, Ulrich Bluthers, Omniscious Shardan, Jersey Arbo, Marius Pontmercy, Patrick Miller, Robert Toland, and Tactical Fruita Bella. If you want to join them in supporting the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or if you'd like, just share the video with some other people who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.